My name is Sam Bingham, and today I'm going to explain how modern web applications allow the front end and back end to communicate using APIs and why architecture decisions matter when designing an application. So the front end is what the user interacts with on the browser side. The back end runs on a server and handles all of the business logic, data retrieval, and most security concerns. The two systems will communicate using HTTP requests and responses. API is essentially a contract between the front end and the back end. The front end sends a request for specific data, and the back end responds with structured JSON data that the front end can expect. REST APIs use HTTP methods like get, post, delete, put, things like that, which is very, very helpful in limiting what exactly the user or the front end can do with the data. For example, certain data could only be retrieved. They're not allowed to change that or remove it. So it's definitely very helpful there. So this is an example of the data flow going from the front end to the back end. In my senior project, I'm using .NET on the back and then Angular on the front. So in this example, the user interacts with the front end, of course. The front end will have a service within the component that will send a data request to the backend API, usually another service, using those HTTP requests. That backend API will in turn either pull data from a database, or it can even use another external API to retrieve some data. In my case, I'm using um, some public data from the government about VIN data. So my backend service calls those APIs to get that data. And then it will return that data back to the front end in a consistent format that it can expect. This is important to show a separation of concerns. The front end shouldn't have to worry about how the back end is getting the data. It only cares that it can receive it. This is an example of the JSON structure that I use in my project. Angular expects this format and maps it to TypeScript models. If the structure changes, the front end also has to change because it is no longer receiving the data that it is meant to and is designed to. In this example, we have an object titled vehicle, which contains key value pairs inside of it, such as VIN, of course, has the VIN string. The make and the model each have Honda and Accord as their values. Recalls is a JSON array. It can contain several objects like vehicle, which will each contain more key value pairs. So this JSON structure is very helpful in sending very structured data back and forth from the front end and the back end. How the back end structures its responses directly affects the front end's complexity. It's important to use consistent response shapes and clear data object models so both sides are clear on what is being transferred. This helps with robust error handling and secure CORS policies, keeping everything tight. For example, if the backend randomly returns different response shapes, the front end will either not work or it needs extra logic like type guards or something like that, and it just takes more work to process the datable into a usable and consistent format. Clean API contracts reduce bugs and simplify development, as well as making the security much easier and more predictable. Overall, modern web applications aren't just pages with data on them, they're systems where the front end and the back end are separate applications communicating through APIs. Reliable and predictable data formats and responses are crucial for good API architecture, which in turn much improves the scalability and maintainability of an application as it goes on.